consider that. Also, why was it another centurion that was the first from among the Gentiles to receive the Lord? And so I'm just saying. But first, before I can say, we just need to touch on these four purposes of man, okay? Let me say this. When we were given the Great Commission to go into all the world, that wasn't just geographical. He's talking about going into every field, every profession, everything. And I believe some of the greatest ministries will never stand behind a pulpit like this. We've got to see it. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because we've got to get this now. We have to do this to mature. And if we're not walking in our purpose, we can grow in all kinds of knowledge, have all kinds of experiences, but still be immature. Okay, four purposes of man. First one was fellowship with God. We're created for His pleasure. Nothing else will work without that as a foundation. You know how those who are the most successful in any field are those who do the basics best. It's true. And the best golfers are out there every day practicing the basics over and over again. The best Christians are doing the same. You can do all kinds of miracles and have faith to move mountains, it says. If you're not doing the basics, it's not going to count. And that basic is loving God first, above all things. And if there's any way we can measure our maturity, first it is we will be growing in love for God. It's our number one job description as human beings, loving God. And number two is loving each other. So that's fundamental. That's as basic as we can get. So fellowship with God is first. Second was work. Man was created for work, to do a job, to cultivate the garden. This is before the fall. I've had so many people say, well, I thought work was the curse. No, toil was the curse. Toil is to accomplish with great and painful effort, but we were created to accomplish things. Okay? It's in our nature. Psychologists have even recently determined that any human being will go insane who is deprived of meaningful labor. We're made to be doing something, accomplishing something. Number three, be fruitful and multiply. What did the Lord say He was going to do to those branches that did not bear fruit in John 15? We've got to be bearing fruit. If we're abiding in the vine, we will be bearing fruit. If we're not bearing fruit, that is only evidence we're not abiding in Him. If His life is flowing through us, there will be fruit. And multiply it. You know, He put it in every one of us to not just do it, but to do it big. You know, ambition is not wrong. Selfish ambition is wrong. But He put it in our hearts. How many of you have a vision for having an insignificant life? No, there's just something in our nature. He made us this way to bear fruit and to multiply. Do it big. That's good. We need that. Fourth purpose, take dominion. Rule, authority. And what we have to do, we've got to walk in all of these to accomplish our purpose. Just a couple of little hints. I mean, this deserves a whole lot more attention than I can give it now, but I think you're mature enough. You get it. You got it. Every one of us has been given a garden. We have a spiritual domain where we are supposed to walk with God, cultivate, bear fruit, and multiply that fruit, and we are supposed to have dominion over that garden. Now, that's what we've got to find. What is the spiritual domain that God has given to us? Now, I think it's wherever we are. I know school teachers that grabbed this and they said, I am taking dominion over my class. I am going to be their shepherd. I'm going to cultivate this garden. I'm going to sow seeds in their life every chance I get, and then I'm going to be sure to water those seeds. Keep the weeds out. Keep the birds of the air out, the demonic out. Take spiritual dominion over that garden. I know housewives said, I am taking dominion over my neighborhood. And they start taking it personally. If any of the neighbors' kids get into drugs or have accidents or whatever, they start taking spiritual dominion. And they're constantly cultivating their garden. I know some who have taken the grocery store they shop in. They said, this is my grocery store. And they go in there to sow seeds. They go in there with seeds all the time and with water to sow the other seeds they've already sown. And pretty soon you watch these people. They go in the grocery store. The helpers will come up to them. They know it because they're their shepherd. And they're bearing fruit. And they're taking dominion. Now, I remember one teacher who told me, she was a science teacher. And she said, I have really been blessed. When I started doing this with my class, I got promoted. I became principal. I did the whole thing with the whole school. And I believe I'm supposed to increase again. She said, but what I really love is science. I really feel like I need to take dominion over science. I said, that would work. That would be great. She really wants that to be her field, where she is just sowing seeds, watering them, and seeing it brought to God or connected with God, things like that. And if we are faithful in little things, He'll make us ruler over the bigger things. Of course, our families are part of that garden. And if you are a leader or an elder in a church or something, of course, that's a primary garden that we have. But where does God have you? And how would it change if you started taking over your office that way? Now, you can be the janitor and have spiritual dominion over a whole corporation. If the president gets in trouble, he'll come to you for counsel. And you can start taking spiritual dominion. That's why I think, didn't the Lord do His greatest works with small groups? He didn't walk on water in front of everyone. He gave the greatest teaching ever given to just two people on the road to Emmaus, where it was Christ preaching Christ from the beginning of the Scriptures to the end. Could it ever get better than that? Just two people heard that sermon. We never heard it. My point is, I think some of the most anointed teachers will never stand behind a pulpit like this. But they'll give incredible teachings at a lunch table. And it will be anointed. Some of the greatest pastors, they will be the ones pastoring their neighborhoods, their offices, where they shop. But do you understand? Because if we equip the saints to do the work of the ministry, in what we call church now, there's not enough time, no space for everyone to function in ministry. I think only a tiny fraction of the ministry of the church is supposed to be in what we now call church. And this is important. The gathering of ourselves together is important. The meetings are critical, but that's not the church. Church is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We come together for corporate worship, for vision, receiving vision, sometimes healing, encouragement, spiritual food, but we leave these services to go to the front lines. And the front lines is where I believe most of the work of the ministry is supposed to be done in everyday life, just like Jesus gave us an example. So you got that. Now, you got to take your garden over. And if you don't plant, you don't cultivate, it's only going to have weeds. You just clear a field out there and let whatever grow, all you're going to see grow is weeds, okay? So you can be, in God's eyes, the greatest pastor on earth and nobody even know you're a pastor. according to our typical present mentality. You can be a shepherd. You can be a prophet to corporations, to companies, to governments, and things like that. You see that throughout the scriptures. That was part of the job. But the main thing is the relationship with God. Now, this is my opinion. And some things I could say with greater confidence, thus saith the Lord, but this is my opinion. But I believe that our greatest, most intimate relationship with the Lord should be happening during the week, not on Sunday mornings or not on Wednesday nights. Those are great. Those fuel us and get us back out there and everything. But it was when Adam walked with God in his garden that he had his closest, most intimate relationship with him. We should be experiencing him as much or more every day in everyday life as we are in any church meeting. Now, there is a dynamic of corporate worship and all that you just can't duplicate that way. It's powerful and necessary, and we can't forsake the assembling of ourselves together and being assembled, but the main place I believe we're supposed to experience the Lord is in everyday life. All right? Now, I'm just going to be tossing a few other things out I don't have time to elaborate on, and I'm out of here tomorrow, so then clean up the mess. There is a military demeanor coming upon the church. We can't become what we're called to be without it. Now, we also know the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We're not an army that's being put together to wound or kill, but rather the opposite, to heal. We're not out to conquer people, we're out to set them free. And but it is a military force. God uses the term Lord of Hosts, or the title Lord of Hosts, over 10 times more than he uses any other title in Scripture. Now, Lord of Hosts means Lord of Armies. That's the way it's literally translated. And he is a martial God. It says that throughout the Scripture. He is a military God, a military leader. And, when the children of Israel left Egypt, it says they were a great mixed multitude. A mob. Kind of like us now. Before they got to the Red Sea, it says they were marching in martial array. Look at how fast God got them in that. Now, I just want to touch on a few things now because God's army is mobilized. Now, the church is many things, and we've got to be all of these things. They don't contradict each other. They all fit together. We're called to be a temple. We're called to be a priesthood. We're called to be a field, a holy nation. We're called to be a bride. But two things that we're called to be, which you hardly see any, manifestation of it yet, but I think it's going to be the two greatest at the end. We're called to be a city, and we're called to be an army. And what does this city look like? We could stay a long time there. The beginning of faith was Abraham's vision of God's city. All true sojourners are seeking that same city. Do we see the city? He wanted to be a part of what God was building, not just men. And he sacrificed everything to do that. I think all true sojourners, that's in their heart. This is what compels them on. Now, you guys are obviously sojourners. You wouldn't be out here on a night like this doing this. You're seeking, you're after. But we've got to become that city now. A manifestation. That city is going to be set on a hill. The world's going to see it. Okay? We're also going to be the army. Now, there's some ways that we're totally different from any human military or earthly military, there's some ways that we're going to be much more alike. We're going to learn to form strategies with clear objectives. We're going to know how to measure progress toward those objectives, know how to mobilize the forces that we need or the resources that we need to take those objectives. We're going to start thinking with military strategy and tactics and things like that in a whole new way, and it's going to make us much more effective, much more able to bear fruit that remains and isn't lost again so quick to the world. And we've been taking a lot of ground only to lose it right back to the enemy. And then the enemy comes in 7 times worse, in the vacuum. So we got to learn to take ground and then to hold it, then to occupy until he comes. So there are a lot of ways it's going to work out. I think we're going to, see more and more of that. I wrote a book last summer called The Army of the Dawn. I got a real download on this. Many of these things I've been seeing for years, but they just all came together in a rush. I went down to write another book, and I didn't even get started. I got a download, and this is important. Since then, I just this week finished part 2, another volume of that, the army that we're going to see the church become and how this relates to us. Okay? Now, one of the things, when I was a brand new Christian, the Lord started speaking to me about this and about an extraordinary company of warriors he was going to raise up in the last days. Now, there's a saying in the military, there are many soldiers, but not many warriors. Now, soldiers can be great. They can accomplish many things military, but there's a difference in the military. One of my best friends, by the way, I don't know if you got this in Canadian news, but he was all over U.S. news the last couple of days. He's a member of our board, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. He was fired, he's retired from the Army, but he just got fired from, he taught a course at Hampton-Sydney College on leadership, and they fired him because the LGBT complained about him. They fired him. Word went out all over instantly, and there was such an overwhelming response. And 6 hours later, they hired him right back. Said, "Heck with the LGBT." Where, And that's all over the news today. If you have the Fox News, watch that. He's been on that a lot, and it's on their app. But Jerry's been a friend for a long time. He's a member of our board of our ministry. But he's also a part of the Family Research Council. But he spends 2 or 3 days a week. All he does is meet with senators, congressmen, Supreme Court judges, whatever, and he seeks to educate them on what's really going on. Now, Jerry grew up in the Delta Force. He was one of the first officers in the Delta Force. He was a commander of Delta Force. If any of you saw the movie Black Hawk Down, he was a commander of Delta during that battle and some of the other battles. He led the invasion of Panama, and he's the guy that Noriega surrendered to. And that, but he's been one of our great military heroes in America, but he's almost always been in special ops. And then as he increased in rank, they gave him, at one time he commanded all special forces, Navy SEALs, all of them, and then he went on to head up our covert operations at CIA for a few years before he got promoted above that, headed all Defense Department intelligence. So he was been in a place over the last 30-some years to probably understand what's going on in the world better than anyone, just because of his history and all. But when I owned an air charter service, and we got a contract to fly the Delta Force commanders. And back then, this was like in the early 1980s, mid-1980s. Now, Delta Force, the U.S. Army Delta Force, was a prophetic force that was a result of Colonel Beckwith, who's considered the father of the Delta Force, had a vision when he was in Vietnam that terrorism was going to become a greater threat to Western civilization and to our country than communism was. Now, at that time, terrorism was not even a word. They didn't know what he was talking about. Nobody was using that word. And he had to get authority to stand up this counter-terrorist force when nobody even believed it. You know, nobody had seen anything, didn't know what it was for. And if you read the story of the Delta, its biggest enemy, greatest enemy for its first 20 years was the U.S. Army. Nobody liked them. What do you think? You're some kind of elite soldier? You think you're better than us? You know, they had to steal their equipment and their weapons and all from the other army, which I better not say some of this stuff they did, but and the Russian army kept trying to put them out of commission, but some general would get the vision, understand it, keep them alive. Occasionally a president would understand, no, we're going to need this. And then they became so effective, you know, when we went into Afghanistan, you know, Russians had been fighting them for 20-some years and left, defeated, couldn't win. They've sent in some of our Delta guys, some of the Green Berets, just to spy out the land while we were building our army, our forces in Kazakhstan, I believe. Before we could put an army together, the Delta guys had already taken over Afghanistan. Now, they did it by calling in airstrikes and things like that. They used everything, but one of these guys could be worth a whole battalion or maybe even more of other regular soldiers. These are some of the most incredible people, and I've gotten to know a whole lot of them, and I can say this about them. They are all a bunch of nuts. They are crazies. I remember the first time Jerry Boykin came to our place at Heritage, and every time I'm with him, I pick a little bit more of their history, trying to understand, because the Lord told me this is a prophetic parallel of what he's going to raise up. That's why I'm sharing this story. He is raising up an elite force. These are the ones Jude prophesied of, that he, of course, was quoting from the book of Enoch in Jude when he talks about the Lord will come with his, it's literally, if you read it in the literal original language, his mighty 10,000. It's not tens of thousands at all like some translate. It's literally 10,000. When the Lord started showing me who these guys were, guys and girls, that I was thinking, where are you going to get 10,000 in the whole earth? You know, we haven't seen anything like this before. And when I was a young Christian, he started showing me about this. And I would find little pieces, little things about this force that was coming over the years. A book would give me insight, and I've studied our military history and a lot of special forces, and but there's some right here in this room. And if you're not one of these, it doesn't mean that can't do extraordinary exploits for the Lord, or do great things, maybe even greater. I mean, you need regular army too, and but there are some extraordinary vessels right here in this room. And they may not, probably don't even know who they are. But if you know who Bob Jones was and his shepherd's rod thing, any of you know that experience? Prophetic friend of ours used to have it once a year. Well, his last one before he died, I was in this experience with him. And we were before the throne. This is the only experience Bob has ever had of this type where somebody else was with him. And we were before the throne, and the Lord was giving us both gifts. And you know what my gift was? 12 Babe Ruth candy bars. Awesome, isn't it? I knew immediately what it meant. Who's Babe Ruth? He was the heavy hitter who changed the game. He changed the whole game of baseball. But also, these candy bars are full of nuts. I remember first, as I was saying a minute ago, the first time Jerry came to our facilities at Heritage, I said, okay, Jerry, of all of my staff or people around here that you've seen or met, who do you think would make good Delta? He didn't hesitate. He said, Todd Bentley, that guy's Delta. Really, the Delta guys were such misfits, they could not make it in the real Army or the regular Army. They didn't fit. It didn't work. But he said that's exactly who they looked for, because they were fighting an enemy that was developing all new strategies, everything. He said he had to have people that would think outside the box. He couldn't have people with the regular Army mentality. Now, a lot of you have felt like misfits your whole life. You were made that way. You're a nut on purpose. And but given the right circumstances, in the right place, these nuts could be some of the most incredible fighters. Our History Channel did a special on all world special operations groups, from the South Koreans, the Russians, the British, all of them together. And at the end, they all, said who they thought was the most effective special operations group in the world. Every single one of them named Delta Force. And even our Navy SEALs, everybody. In fact, the SEALs, now these SEALs are incredible special ops people, but the Delta turned down the assignment to go get Osama bin Laden because that was so easy. The SEALs can do that. I'm just saying. Now, I was Navy. I was nearly Navy. I was kind of borderline Navy. Because even the Navy didn't, I was in aviation, and they didn't even think we were real military, and we didn't act like it much. But, Delta guys don't use any military protocol. They call officers by their first name, grow their hair long, they look like a bunch of hippies. Because they're always undercover, and they don't want to mess up somewhere and say, hey, Colonel, or something like that, to give away that they're military. But that's one reason the military hated them so much in their formative years, because they wouldn't even salute officers or anything like that. And they were so secretive. This is a true story. One of them, his wife, for 14 years, thought that he worked for the telephone company because she had heard somebody call him an operator. It's a true story. I mean, everybody, they just showed up at this base. Nobody knew what they were doing. They were so secretive, but they were developing into an incredible force. I think God has a lot of people hidden away like that. Okay, He's going to start gathering them together. And they've got to be used correctly, because they don't mix well. I'm just saying. Now, I love these guys. They're some of my favorite people, but they are out of the box. Weird. Now, a couple of other things. To have a military, there's 4 stages. It talks about in Ephesians 4 the equipping of the saints. That's not even the first step. That's step number 3. The first thing happens when you're brought into a military is you're taught. They'll take 2 or 3 days of orientation, teaching basic military behavior, protocol, and things like that. Teaching, but then they move quickly to training. Where, when I was a flight instructor, I would always start by teaching my students. This is the aileron, this is that, this makes this happen, this your altimeter, your airspeed. You have to teach all the basics. But then there's a time when you get in the airplane, and I would take off the first time. and show them basic maneuvers. I'd demonstrate them, but from then on, you do it. Training begins when they take the controls, and they're doing it. How many of you would like to get in the back of an airliner and see the pilot up there say, "Hey, how are you doing? How long you been doing this?" He said, "Well, I've never really done it, but I've read a lot of books on this, and I know, it's going to be good." I don't know that too good. There's a difference, but my point is, I think probably 95, and it could be higher, of a percent of what is done in church today is teaching. We never even get to the training. After training comes equipping. That's when you give them their weapon. This is your gun. You take care of it. This is how you take care of it. And then the training keeps going to another level. If you're in a tank, you're assigned to a tank, or in my case, it was, we were in aircraft, aviation. But that's the equipping when you get the weapon. Where are the weapons of warfare that we've been given that are divinely powerful and should be tearing down strongholds everywhere we go? The people have not been equipped. And only after that comes deployment. After you're trained, after you're equipped, then you go to the fleet, in my case, or to your Army regiment or division, company, whatever, and you're deployed. And but even then, the whole time I was in, I was in some crises, and I was in some situations where it was real serious and real, but that was rare, really. Even for combat soldiers, they can be in combat for a few days, and then they're given a few days off. You're not in combat perpetually. Nobody can handle that. But the point is, when we weren't in combat, everything we did was training to get better and better and better at what we did. And every time, I was fortunate to be trained by one of the world's best pilots. He even trained the Israeli Air Force pilots, who at the time had the best pilots probably in the world. And but he inculcated into me, every time you get in this airplane, you say, you will do it better than you did last time. And in every way, and constantly challenging yourself, and as well as all the other challenges that come normally with that job. But there's something of that mentality too, where I think, I had some friends on the Washington Redskins football team. This is years ago, but they were playing their big rival, the Dallas Cowboys, on a Monday night game, and they wanted us to come up a few days early just to hang out with them. And I was amazed at their training. And then the night before the game, I was staying at the home of one of the players, and he couldn't stay at home. He had to stay with the team in a hotel, even though it was a home game. They had to stay totally focused before that game. And what would happen if we took gathering for meetings that serious? What would happen if we took our calling and purpose? Now, I've known a lot of professional athletes, and I really respect anyone that can make it to that level. It is an incredible accomplishment. I remember one time I was having lunch with 3 guys at the table who had all been Heisman Trophy winners, which in our country, that's the best college player for a year. 3 of them at the table were Heisman winners. And I said, okay, how did you get started? Every one of them, it was from 8 to 12 years old, said, I'm going to be this. By the time they were 12, they knew what they were going to be, and that was the focus. They would spend hours a day, every day, preparing for that from the time they were that young. In summertime, they said, when other kids went swimming, to parties, everything, I'd stay home and train. I remember sitting in Reggie White's den with him one time. He used to play for the Green Bay Packers. He He was one of my best friends for years. And another teammate came over who was also a Hall of Fame player. And they were just sitting around talking. And all of a sudden got real serious. And I can't remember which one, but one of them just said, you know, there are people in every single city we play in that could be doing what we're doing better than we're doing it. They just didn't have the discipline. They had the skills, they had the talent. And I remember, Reggie, when he was in high school, went out for high school football. Now, he was a gigantic defensive lineman. And for a while, he was the highest paid player. I think he was the only defensive player that ever became the highest paid in the league for a while. But he, when he went out for high school football, his coaches would beat him up every day. Punch him with their fist. Every single day. Nobody else didn't touch any other player, just Reggie. Finally, he said he couldn't take it anymore. He just burst into the head coach's office. He said, Coach, why are you guys picking on me all the time, beating me up, and don't do it to anybody else on the team? He said, I'll tell you why. He said, we went to the parents of all the players to get their permission to do this, and your mother's the only one gave us permission. True story. I sat through a few games with his mother. I tell you, I would say the safest place in this stadium is on the field. But great lady, but tough. No, now Reggie was one of two guys that got to go to college on a scholarship from his team. Of course, he was All-American, became a, All-Pro for 13 years, one of the best players ever, but it was tough. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because if you're going through a lot of stuff, maybe it's because of your calling. It says Solomon used to chafe under his father's discipline. And he said the same thing. Why is it I can't get away with the same things you let my brothers and sisters get away with? And David's response was, they're not called to be the king. Don't waste your trials. Don't run from your training. Embrace them. We're all going through them. Comes with life. We've been dropped behind enemy lines. The whole world lies in the power of the evil one. And in this thing, in a battle, you can't just say, wait a minute, stop shooting, I've got a headache. Time out, stop this. Doesn't work that way. I tell you what, we've got to get used to being in a battle until this life is over. It's going to be a fight, just get used to it. But warriors not only learn to embrace it, they love it. They run to the sound of battle, not away from it. James said, count it all joy when you encounter various trials, because the testing of your faith is more, and Peter says, more precious than gold. It says in Acts 14:22, Paul said, through many tribulations shall we enter the kingdom of God. When I saw the title of this conference, Advancing the Kingdom, you know what that means? Ratcheting up the trials. That's how the kingdom advances. When Paul said, through many tribulations shall you enter the kingdom, in every trial, every tribulation, there's a gateway to the kingdom. And if we would learn to find it, we could get through those a lot faster. So we got to start in every trial. Okay, here's another opportunity to enter the kingdom. Go deeper into the kingdom. Build my life on the kingdom more. You're going to have the trial, so why not make the most out of it? There's one friend of mine, you say, you never fail one of God's tests. You just keep taking them until you pass. So why not let's get over these. Let's learn to seize these opportunities. Don't waste your trials. Don't waste any of them. But look for that gate to the kingdom. Look for that. Is he trying to cause you to grow in love, grow in patience, grow in faith? What is he trying to do here? Why? Now, I know a lot of us can look back and say, I've wasted trials for 30 years. I've wasted so many. Well, he can make up the years that the locusts have eaten. Just get going now. It doesn't matter. We're here now for a reason. And we want to finish strong. And it may take us a while to finish, but it may not. Let's finish strong. And but there's this I think warrior mentality that you're going to see arising. And they love the fight. And because they know here's another opportunity. Here is another opportunity. So do you see the opportunities presented to you? And if they're more severe than other people going through, just consider it could be because you've got a higher purpose. You've got a calling that requires this kind of training, tough training. Now, the one other little thing, I wish I could develop this some, but I remember when I first went to boot camp, and everybody had to go through boot camp. Didn't matter if you were going to be on submarines or aircraft carriers. Didn't matter. Everybody goes through the same basic training because everybody has to get the same basics. And but we started marching like second day. And by the fourth or fifth day, that was most of our day was marching. And I'm thinking the whole time, why are we doing this? I'm in the Navy. I am never going to march around that ship. Now that I'm in aviation, I know we're not going to march around the airplane. Why are we wasting this time? It wasn't about marching. It wasn't about looking good on parade day when we graduated. It was about learning to listen. Hear instructions and follow them immediately, instantly. Now at first, if you didn't hear right and the whole company goes this way and you go that way, you just look stupid and everybody laughs at you. After about a week or so, it gets more serious. 50 push-ups, run 2 miles. And then it gets real serious. We used to have what are called blanket parties. That's not politically correct. We did it. Which if they, after a while, if one person messes up, the whole company is doing push-ups. The whole company is running miles, whatever. So you made everybody go through this. So at night, they would come in and throw a blanket over them and just beat the dog out of them, Part of growing up in the Navy or the Air Force. By the way, do we have any Marines in here? Marine Corps? Former Marines? Or we're not in the U.S., so I guess not. Whenever we do have Marines, I always try to get a sailor to sit next to him in case I use a big word. I'm just saying. But, no, we love our Marines. That's why we own them, keep them. But, the listening, hearing, right now may be one of our biggest problems. I tell you, okay, I'm just saying, and I don't have time not to tell you the full truth, the whole truth. I am yet to meet anyone that has not had military, experience or a high level of team sports experiences that does not have a problem hearing. Hearing instructions, hearing God. Jesus said, be careful how you hear. I was talking to one coach, Joe Gibbs, a couple of years ago. We were having lunch, and because we won his golf tournament, I just need to brag a little bit. Wasn't me. I had a player that he won it. We just carried his bags and watched him, basically. But we were having lunch, and he said this is the biggest problem he had coaching professional football players. He had 3 Super Bowl championships, but he said this was one of the biggest problems he had on every team, is getting his players to heed, to recognize the instructions, to hear the instructions, to get the play right, and then to get the whole team on the same play, doing their part, because it takes everybody doing the right thing for these things to work. Now, I remember I had to go through Marine Corps infantry training, even though I was in aviation. And in the Navy, because we all got assigned to a ground defense force at that time, we had to know basic infantry stuff. And I remember one time when we were learning to set up what are called fire teams, and where you have 3 or 4 men fire teams that you set up a defensive perimeter or whatever. And they told us, they said, if we tell you to go set up your fire team at this point, and you get over there and see another place a little bit further that's a much better position, and you decide you're going to move over to that because it's a better position, if the enemy doesn't kill you, we're going to kill you. Because if we start seeing fire coming from a place we didn't send anybody, we're going to think you're the enemy. Now, it got more serious when I'm flying. If I don't hear the right altitude, the right heading, the right airspeed in some cases, it's really not going to end up well. And you've got to hear, it's still, flying into some of these airports like O'Hara and all, when they're calling, they don't have time for you to read back your clearances at the busiest airport. You've got to hear right. And if you don't, it can really be bad. So that's one of the things, you just have. Now, I tell you, in the days to come, if we are not able to hear when the Lord says, don't go down that road, it's going to be life and death. He said, we were not going to survive if we did not know his voice much better than we do now. Much better. This is one of the things we've got to focus on is communication. He's the captain of the host. He's the one directing his force. Greatest general we could ever have, greatest captain, no question about it. But we've got to hear him. And then it's not just hearing that causes us to build our house on the rock. It's hearing and obeying, not debating. This is a real serious issue, and it's going to be really devastating. It's already, I can promise you this, and it's probably across the board, it's already cost us far more than most of us could imagine not to have heard his word when he tried to give us direction at times. Many of the trials we've gone through were not him, were not necessary. He'll still use them, work things out in our life. We need to learn to use them, but a lot of them were unnecessary. That's what it reads in Peter. If we're encountering various trials, it says, if necessary, which means for some it's not. They've got it. They don't need any more. They're doing it. They've got this. Why are we still going through a whole lot? Because we're not learning the lessons. Now, I didn't come to make you feel good. I've come to make you get serious. Because we're entering really serious times. I think the greatest times that we really can live, the greatest adventure there has ever been on the earth. If we make it through these times, we're going to see, I think, the most exciting things that have ever happened on the earth. But we want to make it so we get to see these things. It is the day. We are coming to the day. Now, there's a lot more I could share about this, but I don't want to wear you out. I felt like you had a full meal before I even got up here. I mean, all this stuff was tremendous that was coming out, the testimonies and all, but I can say this, we've got to get connected in a local church life too, or we're not going to make it. You know, there are two basic words used for church in the New Testament, which is ecclesia, which speaks of the government, the structure. And then there's koinonia in the South. The real pronunciation is koinonia. But in the South, we made it perfect, call it koinonia. But no, koinonia is a bonding together so strong, that is so strong, you cannot separate the parts without both dying. Now, and the only place I've ever seen anywhere in the Word where it gives us the reason why Christians are weak or sick, or in some cases die prematurely, it's because they don't have koinonia. There in 1 Corinthians. It's talking about communion, common union. That word is the Greek word koinonia. Now, I think it's hard to find koinonia anywhere in the world. I've been, there's still places I haven't been, but I've been in a lot of places. A lot of churches, a lot of movements. It is rare to find that. We've got to have it. We've got to have it. We've got to have that local church life. I think one reason we don't have it is many have tried to build on ecclesia first without having koinonia first. That's not the way they did it in the New Testament. They started, when they had koinonia, then they would come bring the ecclesia. You understand that? That you don't need a wineskin until you got some wine flowing. And but I just ask you to search that out. We've got to be bonded together as we're called to be. Now, not only are we not being trained and equipped and deployed as we should, you know, I've asked thousands of people in conferences how many even knew their calling. Usually it'd be about 5% or less. Only maybe half of them are in any degree walking in them. How well would you be doing if 5% of your body was working? It's something we've got to do. And we've got to do this now. It says it's got to be the proper functioning of each individual part. And I think one of the main reasons for church splits and so many people falling away, not in fellowship and church life anymore, is because of the frustration. They feel a calling something, it may be ambiguous, whatever, but they're atrophying in our typical church life. And the frustration builds up. We've got to have people deployed. But you don't want them deployed until they're trained right. But if you get them in that, at least some real serious training and equipping and some deploying, that's enough encouragement to keep them going. And usually it is life-changing. You know, somebody can go on a mission trip, radically change their life. And just seeing God move, and, you know, we've, of course, had prophetic ministry for many years, and it's awesome the transformations you see when someone receives a word. That's great. But it's nowhere close to what happens to somebody when God uses them to give a word. It's like that takes them to a whole new level of encouragement and all, and being plugged in. So we've got to get people doing what they're called to do, functioning in this body. It's our job if we're pastors, teachers, evangelists, prophets, or apostles. It's our job. And but I think we're going to see it in that book I wrote, The Army of the Dawn. I think he gave me some wisdom and strategy for how this transformation is going to come. And very practical transformation. Now, I elaborate on it a whole lot more in the second volume. But we've got to do this now. We really have to do this. So let me throw out one other thing. I had the Lord ask me a question. He, in this one encounter, he said, you always thought that it meant that wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there he is in the midst of them. That it meant if just 2 or 3 of you could get together, I'll be there. I said, yes. He said, have you ever considered that if you have more than 2 or 3, I'm not going to be there? I said, no, I didn't. And he brought me back to something we'd been doing back in the 80s and early 90s, maybe, when several friends and I, we would go to cities trying to bring unity in the body of Christ. So we wouldn't go to a city unless a high percentage of the churches in that city came together to bring us there. If they wouldn't do that together, we said, you're not ready. And the Lord just asked me another question. How much fruit came from that? You know, we had good meetings, a lot of stuff happened. I look back at every one of those cities, I don't see any unity in the churches. He said, you should have started with 2 or 3. Then I would have been there. I would have been manifested there. You could have seen me. You would have built on the only foundation that remains, that relation. Then you can add more. He said, that would have brought unity. I'm just saying, our churches, we got a lot of people in our church. How do we do this, Lord? We got to start all over. Do I need to kick all these people out and start again? Or how are we going to get there? He said, no, but you got to learn to take your unit, like we did in the infantry, build your fire teams. Build prayer teams. Evangelistic teams. But make them small. Keep them 2 or 3. And after they've matured operating 2 or 3, then they can add others as they can. But keep them small. They're far more effective. Now, all the fire teams, they were in a squad that became a platoon, became a company, so forth. You're connected to the big army. But I think we've got to learn to build small teams. And then teach them, train them, equip them, send them out, set them out there. We've got to see the army come forth. And we got to see the city, and all of this is related. Now, I'm going to try to elaborate on some of these things tomorrow, but you know, the word that I felt like he showed me, began to show me, I want to wait. Hopefully, we'll be able to share it with you tomorrow for Calgary. But I can tell you this: you're connected to Edmonton. That's 2 that gathered together, 2 cities. Maybe throw Red Deer in the middle or whatever. But there's some kind of, but you know, I had this encounter with the Lord a couple of summers ago. It was the closest I've ever felt in my relationship to the Lord. Totally changed, or is changing my relationship to the Lord. And I may share a little bit about that tomorrow, but one of the things he said, you know, he said, you're a friend and no longer a slave. I didn't know how to be a friend. That was the most awkward thing in the world for me. I've had many encounters with the Lord. I've had 2 physical visitations of the Lord, one where he put his hands on me, laid hands on me. I've had many, or quite a few, where I was caught up into the heavenly realm, caught up before his throne. All of them, for me, were to get orders. Tell me what to do. I'm a slave. I've been trying to be the best slave I could be. And if you ask me, I wasn't even getting close to being one that deserved a promotion. But you know, he always grades on a curve. It's called grace. You know. But for some reason, he felt like, okay, I'm giving you a promotion. He said, now I've got to deliver you from the slave mentality. He said, but you couldn't have gotten here without it. So this is a whole new thing, but I didn't know how to relate to him as a friend. My first words out of my mouth, Lord, when I get to the beach I was going to, I'm going to finish this book for you. You know what he said? He said, labor's cheap. He said, I can get anybody to write those books. He said, but I don't have many friends. People just want to spend time with him. And I didn't know how to do this. And But this is what really koinonia is. It starts with friendship. It starts with family. You know, we're family. Reason he wants his church built on koinonia first. Then you add ecclesia as you need it. Because this church is called first and foremost to be a family, not an organization. If we ever lose that family that we're called to be, we've gotten off track. We're not becoming what we're called to be. But then he started this whole thing. Look, it's not what you do for me, it's what you become. Who are you becoming? Now, I want to share a little bit more about that tomorrow, because to me that's the essence of true prophetic ministry, is simple friendship with God. Where you're such a good friend, where it says Amos 3, where he won't do anything without revealing it to his servants, the prophets. It's not that he obligated himself under the law or anything not to do anything without telling them first, but he doesn't want to because they're his friends. It's like he told Abraham when he told the angels, he says, can I do this thing, the earth, without sharing it with my friend Abraham? And that's the real essence of being prophetic, getting so close to God, he doesn't want to do anything without sharing it with you. And that's available to anybody sitting in this room tonight. In fact, you could be his best friend in the last days. That place is open to whoever wants it the most. And this is the truth. Sound biblical truth. We are all as close to God as we want to be. Right now. You think I'm not very close after? He didn't move. Who wants it bad enough? Everybody wants it when they hear about it, but who wants it bad enough? And people ask me, you think you're going to be one of those 144,000? I say, heck no, that's too low. I'm going to be one of those 2 witnesses. So there's room for one more. Could be in this room. And now, I don't know. You know, I do have a competition. Few friends. Sid Roth is one of them. Every time we talk, I'm closer to God than you are now. I've gotten ahead of you. We got this holy competition. It says provoke one another to love our good deeds, doesn't it? So I've got a few others that I have this competition, and it helps. It helps. I know Bruce Wilkinson, guy wrote the Jabez prayer. I had this thing going with him. I'm going to get closer to God than you. Oh, no, you're not. Then he came to visit one time. He was so close, it was scary. I mean, it was really scary. He had been spending a minimum of 70 hours a week in the Word and in prayer. And but it helps me to have friends like that. But there's some I have a koinonia with that don't have to live close by. But we got this thing, and we're friendly competition. Why not? Why not have those that help pull you along, drag you along, push you? So there's room for one more witness. But Lord, I want to ask you for all these hungry people here. They wouldn't be here if they weren't hungry. You said if we seek you, we will find you. Lord, I ask you for prophetic dreams. I ask you to release dreams tonight. We don't even want to waste our sleep, Lord. Lord, I ask you right now for the greatest gift that we could have, and that's love for you. When your son Jesus prayed his last night before he was crucified, that the same love wherewith you loved him would be in us. Father, I ask you to give us your love for your son Jesus, that you will fill us with that same love that he prayed. And I know you hear his prayers. I know you will answer his prayers. There will be a people that walk in that. I ask you, Lord, make it, Lord, we want to be that people. Where Paul said the love of Christ controls us. Lord, that could be said of us too. It is the drive of our life to know you, And we can't know you without loving you. But Lord, we ask you for revelations, first of who you are, where you sit. Show us your city that would compel us, like Abraham, to do whatever it takes to be a part of that. And Lord, we ask you to lead us forth with vision and purpose, but most of all, of serving the greatest King there will ever be, and being the best servants we could possibly be for the great King. I ask you for every one of these, impart that love, impart that hunger, impart that desire, that it would control us from this night forward. In Jesus' name I ask you.